Please support us on Patreon. More on that at the end of the video.
Good afternoon. The housing crisis is dramatically worse now than it has been at any time in many people's lifetimes. The American housing affordability crisis has reached its worst point, to be specific, in 40 years, with 75% of working and poor people unable to afford a typical home as of early this year. Renters are paying more today in 2006 than they were 20 years ago, and this is for inflation-adjusted increases. Even in the last 5 years, rents have jumped up nearly 30%. Have your wages gone up in the 5 years by 30%? Over 110 million Americans, or nearly 43 million households, are renters in the United States. The Census Bureau estimated in 2024 that a large share of those renting households pay 30% or more of their monthly income on rent, meaning that they are rent burdened because, that means that you don't have enough left over for your other needs. And nearly half of those are people who are severely rent burdened, meaning you're paying at least half or even more than half of your paycheck in rent. And it means that when you pay your rent at the first of the month, you have almost nothing left for unexpected expenses or even just the basic needs like grocery and other needs of your children. Fortune magazine article from 2 months ago said Americans are so broke and housing is so expensive that rent now, pay later is on the rise. What is this rent now, pay later? Do people know about this? I mean, these are companies like Flex, Livable, and Affirm. These are the really nice sounding names of these companies, Livable, Affirm. What do these companies do? They pay the landlord, your landlord, full rent when it's due, and the renter repays the company in 2 or more installments over the course of time plus fees. So for example, if your rent is $1,850 a month, you would pay for, let's say you can afford to pay $1,350 to your landlord in the first of the month. The company like Flex would pay the landlord the remaining $500 until you can pay the landlord $500, let's say 2 weeks later when you get your next paycheck. For this service, Flex would charge you a $15 monthly subscription fee as well as 1% of your total rent, which is $1,850. $18.50 is 1% of $1,850 a month rent, which means that you pay a total of $33.49 to Flex for a 2-week loan of $500, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you know what it is? It's an effective annual percentage rate of 172%, which means that it's like paying your credit card company 172% interest on a small loan. And these are known as innovations under capitalism. And we're seeing how innovative this system is. What it really means is that the capitalists are really innovative in finding new ways to squeeze more blood from working people. Yeah. And Flex company openly admits that most of their customers are low-income renters with very weak credit profiles. So this is nothing different than payday lending. In other words, the poorer you are, the more you end up paying for the same thing. Renters are in dire straits. Homeownership is out of the question for the majority of working-class Gen Z adults. For many Gen Z adults, and what I'm about to say is not a joke. This was shown in a poll that for Gen Z adults, World War III is a more likely scenario in the next 5 years than personal homeownership. That is how much out of reach homeownership is for the most part for the younger generations. Almost 1 million people are homeless now in the richest country in human history. So, given this situation, let's get the basics right first. Both the corporate media and the Democratic and Republican politicians claim that the housing affordability crisis is because of inadequate supply of housing. Have you heard this? It's everywhere. Everywhere we go, they say that we need to build more housing and if supply goes up and fulfills the demand for housing, finally the price of housing, both rents and mortgage payments, will come down to affordable levels. Along with that, there's another common claim that relaxing the zoning regulations will allow housing to be built and prices to come down. Goldman Sachs, Wall Street Bank, Goldman Sachs last year was so kind as to inform us that restrictive land use regulations are supposedly the most important housing market obstacle. This is another claim, this onerous burdens on construction companies that we need more and more deregulation. This is all absolute rubbish. My city council office, when I was on the Seattle City Council, supported every pro-density policy because we do need more apartments. But not just more of these incredibly expensive townhomes, but this idea that constricted supply or restricted housing or too much regulation on construction companies are the main reason for skyrocketing rents and mortgage rates is seriously just a pile of nonsense. Let's look at the facts. The argument that housing supply has not kept up is proven false on its face. The number of housing units across the United States increased by 9.5% between 2014 and 2024, while the population grew by 6.7%. This is according to US Census data. This is not some socialist conspiracy. These are numbers that show that housing units far exceeded the population growth. Yet, rents have not stayed steady or come down. Rents have skyrocketed. Am I right?
Yeah.
For much of the time that I was on the Seattle City Council, this city, the city of Seattle was the construction crane capital of the United States, which means it had the largest number of construction cranes of all cities. A lot of townhomes and apartments got built. What has been the end result? Seattle has a median rent of nearly $2,600, which means that half the rental units are more expensive than $2,600. It is one of the 10 most expensive cities in the country. Supply overall went up, but the supply of affordable housing remains remarkably low. And in fact, it is going down. The proportion of housing that is affordable to the vast majority of working class people, that proportion is actually decreasing. And the numbers don't lie. Only 35 of affordable and available rental homes exist for every 100 extremely low income renter households. So if you want to talk about the supply of supply of housing, then the supply that we want to talk about is the supply of affordable housing, which is what Goldman Sachs is never going to talk about. Among the largest owners of multifamily buildings, that is, rental apartment buildings, private equity is now the dominant form of financial backing. Just to explain in plain English, this is how the Wall Street economists speak, but in plain English, all that means is that billionaires and multimillionaires are increasingly using rental housing as an avenue of profit making. Private equity firms often act like a corporate version of a house flipper. They seek deals on apartment buildings, they slash costs or hike rents, depending on what works for them, and then they upload the buildings at higher price, driving up rents. So it's not surprising to see why the wealthy owners of Goldman Sachs will peddle the talking points about restricted zoning and constricted supply. If you look at what Goldman Sachs made in terms of profits through real estate investments, it rose 27% by almost $4 billion just in 3 months in 2024. That's just one data point that I'm sharing with you. I could share a lot of data points, but it gives you a sense of quite how much profit there is from exploiting millions upon millions of working class renting families. And the real estate developers are raking it in. Just to name a few companies, these companies, almost did not even exist 25, 30 years ago. You have Greystar, which is the largest multifamily, meaning, apartment building landlord and property manager, which manages almost 1 million units. You have Blackstone, which is the world's largest, sort of what's called alternative asset, meaning sort of all assets put together. It manages over $1 trillion of assets. That company owns roughly 250,000 rental units. Blackstone, among its ownership, also owns Invitation Homes, which is a very, major landlord. Your landlord, ultimately, when you look at the paperwork, might be Invitation Homes. It's very likely. Invitation Homes owns so many apartments that they could easily supply the housing for the entire country of Iceland. And then you have Essex Property Trust, which has 60,000 apartments, Progress Residential, which has almost 250,000 homes, and then something called Asset Living. In all these names, keep Blackstone and Essex Property Trust and Progress Residential in mind, okay? Because I'm going to come back to those three names in a little bit. The biggest steps towards, and this is the story, this is one of the most important parts of the story, you will never be told by corporate media or by any Democratic Party operative. The biggest steps towards private equity consolidation in rental housing were taken not under Trump or another Republican, but under Democratic President Barack Obama's administration in the wake of the Great Recession. And we can explain this using the example of Blackstone. We don't have time to take up all examples. But Blackstone, as I said, is the world's largest private equity firm with $1 trillion in assets. After the 2007 subprime mortgage crisis broke out, obviously it was, when many of you were children or maybe not even born. This This subprime mortgage crisis was devastating. Hopefully you have at least read about this. Millions of working families were destroyed by foreclosures, not to mention mass unemployment. And what was Democratic President Barack Obama doing at that point? He was bailing out Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs, like Blackstone. Look at the statistics. If you go and Google this, you will see statistics anywhere from $1 trillion to $16 trillion to $23 trillion. These are the amounts of dollars worth of bailouts of Wall Street banks that happened between Democratic President Barack Obama and Republican President George W. Bush. Can you imagine how much money was given for free to these guys who actually caused the crisis in the first place? So with the money they got from the bailout, Blackstone was able to buy millions of dollars in cheap housing with unbelievably cheap loans at pennies to the dollar, cheap loans from government guarantees. And in total, Blackstone obtained government guarantees of $1 billion in rental home mortgage-backed securities. So as Americans suffered, billionaires and multimillionaires like those of Blackstone profited 3 times over. First of all, they were directly responsible for the crash. And keep in mind, as the crash was about to happen, they were making a killing, which is part of the reason the crash happened. So that's the first time they benefited. Then they got bailout. So that's the second time. And then third time, after everything crashed, they bought up property at rock bottom prices. The post-recession exploitation of renters and homeowners, engineered by both the Democratic and Republican parties, was one huge step in Blackstone's journey towards becoming one of the biggest landlords in America. And today, Blackstone owns nearly $300 billion in real estate. The same people shouting from the rooftops about housing supply and supply-side economics are happy to jump on the bandwagon of destroying existing affordable housing. And as we speak, about 500,000 affordable homes, publicly owned affordable homes, as part of New York City's Public Housing Authority, are on their way to being demolished and privatized. A project that started before Democratic Socialists of America Mayor Zohran Mamdani was elected, but a project that he is continuing under his administration. So all of this shows us that there is absolutely no prospect of housing becoming affordable ever with for-profit ownership. In fact, affordability is going the other way. Housing is becoming more and more expensive. And, look at Seattle. We've seen a residential vacancy rate of 7.5%, meaning 7.5% of residential homes are empty because it actually makes more profit for the big real estate corporations to leave that alone rather than for the rents to be lowered so that they become actually affordable to a vast majority of renters. This is the essence of capitalism. There is nothing unique about the real estate market. This is how capitalism functions. And in fact, it's not even only that. The story doesn't stop at everything I've said so far. It actually goes even further. In fact, many of these corporations are actively colluding in an actually illegal manner to keep the rents high. Many of the large property companies have been found to have conspired, as has been alleged by multiple lawsuits, including one that's in the U.S. Supreme Court, in a price-fixing scheme to drive up rents using rent-setting software from a corporation called RealPage, which aggressively and relentlessly targets tenants for the highest possible rent increases. So all these companies, all these billionaires, they get together. They give you the illusion that they're all in competition with one another. And yes, of course, there's truth to that. But in reality, the dominant feature of capitalism is not the competition between billionaires, is how incredibly united they are in screwing over billions of working people. That is the main feature of capitalism. And so they're all getting together to see how much more blood can we squeeze from the stone of the working class. And, and this has been openly admitted by RealPage executives that their algorithm, their software actually makes far greater profits for corporate landlords than the landlords who don't use the RealPage software. The scandal continues even beyond this. Another aspect of the scandal that everybody should know about is that actually evictions are going up since private equity started buying up more and more and more housing, because studies have shown that Wall Street landlords file for evictions at much higher rates than your small mom and pop landlord. So all of this shows that we need rent control and we need taxes on the rich to fund a massive expansion of publicly owned housing. What is the strategy for winning this? I'm not going to talk about how much we need that and what kind of housing, because it's very clear. As Joe said, it's high quality, publicly owned, affordable housing. It's very clear what we need. What else do we need? We need rent control without corporate loopholes. We need rent control for all residential homes. In fact, we need commercial rent control as well to protect struggling small business owners. It's very simple and clear what we need. The thing that's not clear is what is the strategy for winning this. Step number one is that our movement for renters' rights and the rights of working class people in general for affordable housing is to break from the Democratic Party and to break from the labor and NGO leaders who are tied to the Democratic Party. And we have proven that over and over again through our city council office in Seattle. Corporate landlords openly admitted, and we know this because they openly said this, that while I was in office, while our movement had an elected office in Seattle City Hall, the corporate landlords simply could not win against the renters' rights movement. They simply could not win. We not only won a whole host of renters' rights victories, like a $10 cap on late rent fees, like that if you're a renter who's forced to move out of your rental home because your landlord increased your rent by 10% or more, your landlord owes you 3 months worth of rent to help you move. Have you ever heard of such a law in any other city? It doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because the strategy that we used to win these victories simply hasn't been put to use by any elected officials in the Democratic Party or the Democratic Socialists of America. We also won perhaps the biggest victory won by the George Floyd Rebellion, Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, which was defeating billionaires like Jeff Bezos and winning the Amazon tax, which raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for publicly owned affordable housing in Seattle. And in addition to the big bulk of Amazon tax that we won, which literally raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year by taxing billionaires, we also, in addition to that, won a separate pool of funds also by increasing the Amazon tax, also by taxing billionaires, but a specific pool of funds for dedicated affordable housing for Black working class and poor families, which is a very clear and powerful example of Black reparations. But to win all of this, to win any of this, my office and my fellow revolutionary socialists and I, we had to take what we call a class struggle-based strategy. And step number one, as I said, of a class struggle-based strategy is you have to understand that the Democratic Party is not on your side. If our leaders don't get that, are unwilling to get that because it's hard to fight the Democratic Party, they will betray us despite their best of intentions if they do have good intentions. Our class struggle-based strategy meant that I understood and our movement leaders understood that the Democratic Party is not on our side, which meant that my office wasn't preoccupied with making backroom deals with progressive Democrats. We made no backroom deals with the progressive Democrats either. And not one of the self-described progressive Democrats actually was willing to support the Amazon tax until our movement made it basically inevitable. Basically, a class struggle-based strategy means creating a political price tag for all the Democratic Party politicians, including the progressive Democrats. And a political price tag means that because they are actually just careerist politicians, you create a movement that is strong enough and loud enough that makes it very clear that any Democrat voting against the Amazon tax, for example, cannot have a progressive reputation. They will be shredding their progressive reputation by voting no on our legislation. That is how we won, not by morally convincing them to do the morally just thing. We won it because we used a fighting strategy or a class struggle-based strategy. And that strategy also meant that our office did not allow labor or NGO leaders or the BLM leaders, many of whom did this, to act as gatekeepers, meaning many of the BLM leaders went around claiming that the Amazon tax is not a Black issue. They told me, I'm not Black, so I don't get to speak about any Black issues during the BLM movement. We refused to accept this gatekeeping because it is dishonest on its face. The Black community and the indigenous community disproportionately needs affordable housing, and all of the working class needs affordable housing. So we built the movement with unions whose leadership, like WUFC 1495 and UAW 4121. These are two labor unions on the UW campus, students and workers together. They actually supported Tax Amazon, so we worked alongside them. And mainly, we went to the rank and file of the BLM protest, which is working class people of all races who are marching together in solidarity against police violence and racism. And they were also marching against economic injustice. And on that basis, we also fought for and won extension after extension of the pandemic eviction moratorium. And as I said, many, many renters' rights. What are the Democrats doing? Just very quickly, look at the very close relationship of Wall Street banks and real estate corporations and corporate landlords with the Democratic and Republican parties. First of all, it's a revolving door. Remember Blackstone? Steven Schwarzman, who's one of the co-founders of Blackstone, he is a billionaire. He owns $43 billion. He was Deputy Treasury Secretary under Democratic President Bill Clinton. Real estate and landlord billionaires fund the campaigns of both Democrats and Republicans. And that should not be a surprise to us because the Democratic and Republican parties are two of the most powerful parties of global capitalism. Warmongering Democrat Adam Smith, our opponent, has taken money from real estate billionaires like those of Blackstone. So when you think of Adam Smith, remind people about Blackstone. Don't let Adam Smith get away with it. And then we also see other scandalous features. I mean, there are so many statistics. I could go on and on, but some of the main things. The House Democrats they have a super PAC, the House Democratic, in the U.S. Congress, they have a super PAC. They took $1 million in June 2021. Remember, this was in the throes of the pandemic still, from George Marcus, a billionaire real estate tycoon who owns Essex Property Trust. Remember, I mentioned Essex. And what did the Democrats do on the weekend following taking $1 million from him? They let the federal eviction moratorium expire over that weekend amid a pandemic that was still continuing to surge. Additionally, multiple Democratic Senate and House politicians took money from George Marcus. He donated millions of dollars to Biden's campaign. He is a group of billionaire landlords who together had their personal fortunes increased by nearly $25 billion in the year between March 2020, when stay-at-home happened and the pandemic really hit the United States, and March 2021. So in the year when the lives of tens of millions of working and poor people were being ravaged by the pandemic, these guys made a killing. And as I said, there's countless other examples. Jonathan Gray, the president of Blackstone, he donated nearly $500,000 to Kamala Harris in 2024. This year, genocidal House Democrat Hakeem Jeffries, who's one of the most powerful Democrats in the nation, and he is worried about his re-election. So this year he's going around with his talking points of, we're going to lower housing costs, we're going to end price gouging. Well, what has he done? He has taken $700,000 from this guy named Don Mullen. Who is this guy, Don Mullen? He is a guy behind Goldman Sachs' money. In fact, when the housing market was crashing in 2007 and, millions of foreclosures were about to happen, Don Mullen emailed other Wall Street guys saying, and this is a quote from his email, which got exposed, "Sounds like we will make some serious money." And Hakeem Jeffries has taken money from this guy, and Democratic Socialists of America leader Zohran Mamdani has unconditionally endorsed Hakeem Jeffries. And that is why the last point I wanted to say before closing is that our class struggle-based strategy has to have a very clear and unbending definition of what kind of unity we want to build. Obviously, we need unity because no one person can win anything. No small group of people can win anything. We need a mass force to win gains for the working class against the opposition of the billionaire class and their representatives. But if you start talking about unity with the Democratic Party and with leaders who support the Democratic Party, that road only goes one way. That is the road to betraying working class people. So yes, we absolutely insist on unity, but our definition of unity is uncompromisingly with the working class and with those leaders who want to fight alongside us and who are willing to take on the battle against big business and there are two parties. So let's build that kind of unity to win this campaign. And obviously the first step is getting through from the primary into the general election. But our clarity on the role of the Democratic Party, including the progressive Democrats, it does need to be crystal clear, because otherwise a lot of people will get confused by the Democrats who will end up running in this race and think, well, we have progressive Democrats. We have to push back against that repeatedly and relentlessly and explain to people that this is the only campaign that stands for renters, working people, and those of us who want a better society. Solidarity.
If you want independent news and commentary and more, this is the place. This is Risky Edges. My name is Andres Chang. We have no corporate sponsorship. We have no corporate money. It's just me, my tech guys. So please support us. Help us blow this up by smashing that like button, commenting, sharing, subscribing, turn on bell notifications. Thank you very much. Please support independent media. Thank you. Please support us on Patreon. We put nothing behind a paywall. So if you support us on Patreon, you are also helping those who can't support us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thank you.